Welcome, welcome. This week we are going to talk about something that our European friends already know very well, and that is mini retirement. Although, of course, they don't really call it that here. I'm really excited about this topic because this is something I've actually been doing for a long time, but I didn't realize I was doing. And our guest also has given me a different frame through which to think about my own quote unquote mini retirements. And I hope by the end of this episode, you will maybe be thinking about how to integrate it, or if you're already taking off big blocks of time, maybe being even more intentional with it. So let me introduce you to this week's guest. Welcome to Beyond Better, a podcast that explores a simple but profound idea. We all deserve to live lives we love, and that includes our work lives too. I'm your host, Stacey Ennis, an author, book coach, speaker, and long-time location-independent entrepreneur living in Portugal with my family of four. Join me as I talk business, location independence, writing, publishing, and so much more, all focused on building a life that is beyond better. Jillian Johnsrud has taught, coached, and wrote about mini retirements for almost a decade. She hosts the Retire Often podcast and is a popular speaker and consultant for mini retirements. Her book, Retire Often, shares how to take multiple career breaks to unlock adventure, advance your career, and find financial freedom. Jillian, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited about this topic. When I came across you in your work, I thought this is just so perfect for our listeners. Our listeners aspire to have lives that are not just like better than their parents or a little bit better, but actually beyond better. So tell us, first of all, what is a mini retirement? How do you define that? And maybe you can share a little bit about your own journey and how you've built this into your life.
Yeah, so I define mini retirement, which is just a term that I find to be the most neutral. Some people would call it like a sabbatical or a hiatus or a career break or a gap year. Like there's lots of terms. So pick whichever one resonates, but I define it with three characteristics. One, it's a month or longer. I think a month is kind of that minimum effective dose to really start to get the benefits. It's what distinguishes it from just like a longer ish vacation. The second one, you're stepping away from your 9 to 5 or your primary form of work. So it doesn't mean that you're doing nothing or even just traveling. You could be doing other interesting projects, but it's not your typical kind of daily grind. And the third one is to focus on something that's meaningful, something that's important to you. And when you combine those three, yeah, good stuff can happen. I'm 40. Oh, I just turned 43. I'm 43 now.
Ah, happy
I've
birthday.
done Thank you. It's still my birthday month. Got a couple more days. Yeah, I've done a dozen of them over the years. And I think what's kind of interesting and surprising to me is I think they started off how most people imagine. Like I did more traveling, I did more like personal growth things. Um, but after you recover from burnout and you start to integrate this more, I've used the mini retirements not just to take long trips with my kiddos. I have 5 kiddos at home, uh, but buy rental properties, write books, do other projects, do therapy and personal growth and all sorts of things. So they can be kind of like a Swiss Army knife. Like it's one thing that can have a lot of different functions.
Mm. It's such a, interesting kind of life approach that you've had, and I know this has been for a long time that you've lived this way, but, as Americans, how are we valuable if we're not being productive, If we're not working long hours and really tired all the time, like, that's often our definition of self-worth is our productivity, and we very much live in a depletion culture
Mhm.
that's valued and heralded in American culture. And I imagine that there are people listening to this, especially North American kind of audience, maybe our British listeners, Australians. I don't know, Australians, you tell me if this fits for you. But they're like, sounds great, but I don't have any clue how I would integrate that into my life. I'm sure there's some, assumptions about mini retirements that are inaccurate that
Mm.
maybe we could bust right now. So could you share a little bit of those kind of, like, misconceptions about mini retirements?
Yeah, I when I wrote the book, I divided it into kind of 4 steps, and those first 3, I would say everyone has a challenge with one of those first 3. So it's like how to plan the time. Like you mentioned, what would I even do with this? Like, who am I outside of my job? And that can be a big question mark for people. Um, the second one is career. Like, yeah, that's great. There's no way I can get a month off. Like, that's not realistic. That's not possible. And so I spend a lot of time of like, how would you negotiate that off? How would you have that conversation? How can you plan this in between jobs? And then the third one is financial. Like, yeah, that's lovely. Maybe I can get a month off, but like, how do you afford something like that? I think there's a misconception that it has to be incredibly expensive. And the reality is, like, if you set aside, I make the case in the book, if you set aside like 7% of your income, you could take a month off every other year. They don't have to be tremendously expensive to be really meaningful. Like, I took a month off, a year ago to learn tango. So, like and I gave myself $1,000 budget, 30 days to get as good at tango as I could in a month, and it was so amazing, and for me, it felt like a capital investment into my future. Like, this was a hobby, a social activity, a physical activity that I could enjoy for the next 40 years, and to spend $1,000 in a month giving myself a head start in that felt like a great investment.
I like how you're intentional you are with these sabbaticals, mini retirements, whatever you wanna
Mhm.
call it. And it's interesting because when I lived in the US, so we moved out we lived in a couple countries before we had kids, but I'm gonna put those aside because I was in my 20s, they don't really count. When we moved with our kids to Thailand, this was about, 8 years ago, I think, 7.5, 8 years ago. Before then, I'd never really taken time off. I mean, I took the week here and there, but I mean, I was a solopreneur, but moving we like I had to take a significant amount of time, not just to prepare for the move, but to move. And then when we got there, like it was kind of a disaster. So, I was working on a long project, so I had built in time in case I needed a little bit more space, but I think I ended up taking like 6 weeks or something to
Mhm.
kind of make the move and get there and get settled and all that stuff. Um, and that was really interesting because that was also like my revenue c got higher that year. It's like it wasn't
Mm.
like I lost money, and I've often found that the when I go I take normally August off, although I do have some I've noticed in as a business owner, and I'd be curious to know your thoughts on this, it's actually, for me, more stressful to take an entire month with no touch on my
Mhm.
business, so I've started integrating a one-day touch-in during that month, and that just helps me feel much more
Yeah.
at peace, and when I get back, people are happier, it's worked better for me that way. And then I usually take 3 weeks in the winter, and I
Mhm.
take, like, the odd week here and there,
Yeah.
and I never thought I would get to do that, like, living in the US, and I was always so exhausted, we never took vacations, and, what's I think is so interesting is that that is so baked into what we think is normal
Mhm.
culturally that it's like it not e like, I never lifted my head up and thought, "Could I do this differently?" Until then I
Yeah.
was kinda had to, and then I moved into these cultures, especially now I'm in Europe, where, restaurants shut down for 3 months in the winter, and,
Mhm.
we had, like, a plumbing situation recently, and I, like, WhatsApped the main number and didn't get a reply, and then I called the plumber directly, and he's like, "Oh, well, nobody's watching that because she's out for a month." And it's like it's just kinda this mentality that's like, "What's the big deal?" Like, I people need breaks.
Yeah.
And I'm but I imagine that for the people that you've supported, that read your book, that follow you online, there's, like, almost a mental journey that they need to go
Mhm.
through to get there. What are some of the first steps if somebody is listening and they're like, "I want that in my life." What are some first things that they could do to start to work towards something like that?
Yeah, I always encourage people to start small. Like start with a month off, which if you've never taken a month off, it sounds incredibly daunting the first time. But as you've probably experienced, the more you do it, easier it gets. Like you kind of like figure out the routine and you figure out the rhythm and it's
And
not
it's
this
normal.
huge monumental thing. Yeah, I describe that transition now that I started doing this in my early 20s. It's almost like the seasons. Like it's not a huge deal when summer starts. It's not a huge deal when summer ends. Like you transition between these seasons of work and rest and creativity and exploration and growth and productivity, and it doesn't feel very dramatic. It feels like the normal rhythm of life. But that first one can be, oh, so many fears, so many, so many, I call them like, yeah, buts. Like, yeah, that sounds cool, but, and we all have those yeah, buts. So the reason in the book I started the step one with like, craft this idea is that you want to have that vision for what is the benefit going to be? What is the outcome? What is it that I'm looking forward to? And the more you can kind of like visualize that and internalize that, it will help get you through the next two steps. Whichever one of those feels stressful, whether it's having hard conversations with your employer or deciding to take a break in between jobs. So, maybe that's something you negotiate with your next job or you quit and you don't have another job lined up, which can be super scary for people. Or it's the financial piece, whichever is the one that you're like, yeah, but so starting with those, what would be a compelling way to spend a month? And especially for the North American counterparts. Um, I think like 89% of Americans have experienced burnout in the last year. If you haven't taken a break in years, maybe ever, like that's probably a pretty good starting place. Like that's a good function of this first mini retirement is just taking care of yourself, getting your head above water, maybe doing one cool, interesting thing that would be compelling for you. But I called the book Retire Often versus like take one massive epic mini retirement in your life because the more you do it, the better you get at it. The cost of mini retirements uh, and it sounds a little silly, but the cost of them really are two things. It is logistically challenging and it is emotionally fraught. But the more you take them, the lower that cost of admission is. They're not as logistically challenging and they're not as emotionally fraught as that first one. So knowing, man, this first one's going to be the hardest. So start with something small because that's going to give you the confidence and the clarity and the know-how to like do the next ones.
I like that approach, and it also it's like you don't need to a couple things that kind of resonate for me also in how I work with authors. A lot of times when people go into the author journey, it's like, "This is my one book, and
Mm,
everything rides on this one book." And one of the first things that I often say to authors is, hold an openness to there being more than one book. Because if you can really focus on making this the right book for right now,
yeah.
then that just removes so much pressure and it can make it so much more joyful. It kind of sounds like a similar approach for you. It's like rather than going, this is your one mini retirement and there's so much pressure, don't don't expect so much out of it other than have some fun, get some rest, take care of yourself. That that's pretty like doable, I think, for most people to go in with that expectation. And I also like just to play, listener, viewer, advocate. I can hear the thoughts almost. Oh,
Mhm.
well, my job will never let me take off a month, or I'm the only person in my business, or I only have an assistant and I have clients that expect me to be available. What do you say to these very real
Mhm.
concerns that people have about taking such long breaks?
Yeah, it's really scary to do a thing that you've never done and and a thing that perhaps you haven't seen done. So in the book, because I've done so much one-on-one coaching, I've done group coaching, and it's one thing to say, yeah, go talk to your boss, ask for a month off. But when you're sitting in front of another human, they're like, Exactly how? Or, like, exactly what do I say? Like, what
That's
what
good.
what are the words that are gonna come out of my mouth? And so in the book, I put in a lot of scripts, like, here's how you send that first email. Here's the 3 sentences you put in that first email. Here's how we're gonna structure the story of your time off. I have kind of like the four themes of your story. It has to be positive. It can't be, "I'm so tired of looking at y'all's ugly faces. I need a break from you." So it has to be something positive. It has to be something interesting. Do something cool and compelling. It's helpful if it's specific. So instead of like, "I just want more quality time with my kids," I did a 10-week road trip with my kiddos when they were all itsy bitsy in a pop-up camper. We went to 10 national parks. It's a very specific way to have quality time with your kids, and frame it as a one-time event. A 10-week trip to 10 national parks, not something you're gonna do every single year. Like, that's kind of a one-time thing. If you're gonna hike the Camino, that might be a one-time thing. And so you craft these elements of the story, and then you think through, what are all of the challenges? What are all of those thoughts? I call it radical empathy. What are all the concerns your boss is going to have? You articulate those in your head. You bring solutions. And then the thing that's counterintuitive, but you give them their story. So that might sound like, my mom and my dad had always planned to bike through Croatia when they retired at 60. You might know my dad passed away a couple years ago, but my mom is turning 60 this year. She's set to retire. I would love to be able to take this month and do this bike trip with her while she's still young, while we have this time together. I have a week of PTO. I would need 3 weeks off unpaid. And then you articulate the challenges, those inner thoughts that your boss is having. I know that we might have some challenges. This project's coming up, and who would handle this? And then you bring those solutions. And when you frame it in this really creative, collaborative way, people have so much more success than they imagine up front. Those usually go much better, even if your company doesn't have a policy, even if no one's ever done it. I've even had clients that are like, this you can't do this in my industry. Like, I work in government work, or I work in an insurance company, or like I'm a lawyer, like I'm a doctor, like this isn't something that we do. But when you put in the work up front, you usually get pretty good outcomes.
It reminds me just in life in general that I often tell my kids, if you don't ask, you're not going to get it. And if you do ask and you get a no, you're also not going to get it. So, like, what harm really is there? I'm sure that there are things that you need to consider with your job and your boss. But, to your point, that's a very respectful, certainly if somebody on my team came to me, and obviously I have a very small team, so it's a little different than a big corporation or hospital, but and said that, like, what are you gonna say, no? Like, really? And there might not be, such a, time-bound specific thing, but I imagine that you can create an honest story about
Mhm.
any purposeful reason to take that time off.
Yeah. Yeah, in the book, I call it memoir rules. The rules of a memoir. It all has to be true, and it can't be the whole truth. The whole truth is too big. Whole truth is too complicated. If you give all the details, you lose the plot. So it all has to be true, but it doesn't have to be the whole truth. Just find the little corner of the story that works for this purpose and tell that story really well.
Yeah, I like that advice a lot. I would love for you to maybe share, since you've worked with so many people that have experienced this, one or two stories of people that have gone from that near burnout on that hamster wheel of depletion to integrating this into their lives in a meaningful and consistent way, and how they did that and how that changed their life.
Yeah, it is a really multifunctional tool. So people have lots of different outcomes and they have lots of different challenges, which is part of the reason I do my podcast is that I just highlight people's stories. How have other people done this? What are the benefits to them? What are the challenges to them? Um, I had one client when I started working with her, she had had a couple babies. So she'd had a few maternity leaves and she was like, there's no way I can get time off. So I'm going to have to quit to take a mini retirement, but I desperately need a break. She had a whole bunch of littles. And And I was like, "Okay, okay. Yeah, that works." Um, and so in the process of her quitting, I said, "We should do an exit negotiation," which is something I teach in the book. How do you do an exit negotiation? And I was like, "Based on what you've shared, I think, you should probably ask for a raise, when you quit." And she was like, "Wait, what? Wait, no, I'm like, the day I quit, I'm also asking for a raise?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And here's how we're gonna frame that. You're gonna say, because she did, like, an accounting kind of job. So spring season, super busy. Uh, you're gonna say, "I'll give you 4 months notice. I'm gonna stay through this busy season. I'm gonna handle all these things. I'll help find a replacement. I'll give you 4 months. In exchange, I would appreciate," which is kind of like that magic phrase. Um, and she said, "In exchange, I would appreciate being fairly compensated for my remaining time. Based on market research, here would be the current fair compensation for my job role." Which they were like, "Yes, of course. No, fantastic. Yeah, please just don't leave right now." Like that, we really want you to stay for 4 months. Um, but then as they got closer, and which was a significant raise, it was like a 20% raise for her. Um, she wanted to take the summer off, and and they were like, "So you're really quitting? Like, I know you really want the summer off, but, like, what if you just came back? What if you took the summer off and then just came back in the fall?" Um, and so, she worked out some compromises, like, the end of month books were really important. They didn't want the temp to cover those, so she said she would come in for one day at the end of the month. Took her about 6 hours to, like, settle the books. Um, she hired the temp, she took the summer off, but her stipulation of coming back is, "Actually, I think I want every summer off." Um, and they were like, "Yeah, well, we can talk about that. We can talk about that. I think we can make that work." So we started from like, there's no way they would ever give me time off. Like, it's a small company. I'm the only one who does this job. She was the only person in her whole department. Um, she had a 20% raise. She got 3 months off, and she set herself up to do that repeatedly, which for her gave her that, beyond better lifestyle of like, I wanna be home with my kids in the summer, I wanna do vacations, I wanna do fun stuff, but I wanna have a professional career during the school year and make money and keep growing in my career. And so I think it's like you said, you don't know if you don't ask. Um, and honestly, even if you ask and get a horrible response, that's really good information to know too. If you create a compelling case for your employer and they're like, "Yeah, so we don't actually care about you at all. You're a cog. Like, so please stop complaining about go back to work." Now you know for certain. And you can factor that in of like, how long do I see myself staying with this company? What is my future career here? Or is it maybe time to start thinking about an exit strategy and that mini retirement becomes in between jobs kind of thing?
I love that story. And again, it's like so many times we take in the narrative and don't question it. And so often, like I've seen this so many times. This is a great example. If you simply decide the kind of life that you want and then architect it and ask the right questions and build the right things, that it is very possible to reach that. Another thing you got me thinking about, because I know that a lot of our listeners either are business owners or they aspire to be, when when you said that, you ask and you're kind of like a cog and they don't value you, and then I was thinking about all these business owners who are basically treating themselves like employees they don't care about,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of mind-blowing to me. I love that you brought that up.
When I first started working for myself, I bought a mug that said "World's Best Boss" because I had seen so many business owners be their worst boss to themselves. Um, and to your case of like self-employed, because I do work with a lot of self-employed people, um, I would say for self-employed, those two costs, emotionally fraught, logistically challenging, those costs are higher for self-employed people. Like, if you work for Google and you leave for a month, you're not like, "Man, if I go traveling for a month, Google might not exist when I come back. Like, it might disappear from the face of the earth." Like, it's not really a concern you have. It will keep going. but a lot of business owners do have that. So, to your point that you mentioned earlier about the schedule, I encourage business owners, especially for the first couple of mini retirements, to do about 10% of the hours they typically do in a week. So if you work about 40 hours a week, do at least 4 during your mini retirement because for a lot of them, there's a kind of a process you can go through to organize your business to really facilitate this, but there's things that are, like, really high risk. Like, you really need to have eyes on it, and to not have eyes on it is a disproportionate amount of risk for the return, and most people find they feel better and they feel actually more present in their time off, just checking in for 30 minutes in the morning, checking in on those, like, really key things that they didn't feel comfortable completely delegating, or doing a half day or a full day once a week, and then they're like, oh, they can just, like, exhale and be really present in their mini retirement.
I mean, that really tracks with what I said earlier about just
Mhm.
finding that I need about a day
Yeah.
of in that month. Otherwise, I feel stressed, you know? I want to be the kind of person that can do a full month without thinking at all about, all the things, but in my business, I'm also working with people like on a monthly basis. So we're still in touch, with my private clients and things like that. But I would say like 95% of the month, or maybe 90, I guess, if I'm really mathing it out. I'm on that like mini retirement. So I love that you said that because it also that tracks for me. And I've been doing this now for I don't know if it's been 4 years for something. I mean, I guess, yeah, intentionally probably for 4 years of blocking out this 1 month on my calendar. And that really resonates. Another thing that you write about in your book that I think is such a perfect concept for this podcast is this idea of being stuck at 6. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, 6, I find for most people is a very sticky number and that it's hard to move from a 6.
You mean like 6 being your kind of life quality
Yeah.
on that
In
scale of 1
different
to 10?
yeah, in different areas, if your marriage is a 6, do you go to marriage counseling? Like, if your health is a 6, do you hire a personal trainer? Like, it feels like, oh, there's not a lot of upside. It could get a little bit better, but, like, realistically, there's not a lot of upside, but there is a lot of downside. If your job is a 6, do you find a new job? Do you switch? Like, do you make that big, scary change when things are just kind of okay? Like,
They're better.
my
They're not
friendships are okay, like, my health is okay, my relationships are okay, and so it can be really tough to make changes when you're a 6. There's this, quote from Elizabeth Gilbert that I really like. She said that when things are hard, she has this prayer, and she asks God to make things better, and if he can't make things better, she asks for him to make things much, much worse, and I have found once things get to a 2 or a 3, man, people are open to change. They're like, because it can't get much worse, and there's a lot of upside, and so knowing that that can be kind of our human disposition, a mini return's an interesting opportunity to look at those areas of your life that just kind of feel okay, and you utilize that time to how could we make them beyond better? How could I like my mental health? It's okay, but like maybe I'm a little too stressed, maybe I'm burned out. How could I make that beyond better? And take that time to figure out how to like level some of these things up. One of my mini retirements I did in my 20s, I took a month and I did like intensive outpatient therapy. It was like 6 hours a day for an entire month. It was so tiring. It was so exhausting. But it was doing like a full house renovation. It was like tearing things down to the studs, redoing the electrical, redoing the plumbing. We were just like, we're gonna go in. It's gonna be messy. It's gonna be hard, but we're gonna take care of all these basics. We're gonna fix the foundation. But I was like 27 when I did that. And now I'm still like building on that better foundation. I'm still receiving the benefits of taking that thing that was like, okay, it was maybe a 6 and being able to push it to like an 8 or a 9. And so I think when you're thinking about beyond better, like how do we create the environment to take those things that maybe are a 6 and figure out how we can try to make them an 8. How can we make them a 9? Like, what would it look like for them to be a 10?
I love that. And I think, all of us could honestly look at our lives and find areas that we're, you know, like it's okay, but it's not amazing. And to your point, I again, and I don't mean, I mean, I kind of do mean to harp on American culture a bit, but I think I've deconstructed so much of that living in all of the
Yeah.
countries that we've lived in, and yet I still carry so much of it. It's never,
Yeah.
I can never completely detangle from all of the things that, were kind of like harped on my whole life.
Yeah.
One of those is really, this idea of like just kind of the status quo and just kind of, this is just how things are and just kind of like, what do you expect? Are you like gonna like your job?
Yeah.
What do you think? So I really like that you're challenging that mindset. Another thing that you've brought up a few times, and again, like, so much of this conversation is inspiring me to think about these breaks, these mini retirements that I take. I've never really gone into one ever with a kind of intention behind it other than it's always about, I wanna spend time with my family. We always make a big list of things we wanna do, so it's not like I'm just like, "Well, we're on holiday," and, it's we will have some intention. We often have a trip, but I've never really thought about, like, creating something out of it or achieving, but not in the achieving mindset, like Tango or personal growth,
Mhm.
or, I'm even thinking like, wow, maybe I take a sabbatical to do a Portuguese intensive course because it's going very slowly and I'm feeling a little frustrated with that progress. I'd like to speed it up a little bit, but I don't really have the time. You said also that, these spaces can be used for things like that, but they can also be used for creative projects. So, like
Mhm.
writing a book. So, I'd love for you to share with our listeners and viewers how they could think about this mini retirement as an opportunity to connect with a creative project or to make progress on something or learn a new creative area.
Yeah, the reality is for almost all of us, our lives are full. We're at 100%. There's not these huge vast of margin of time or emotional energy or mental energy, like, it's all been allocated. So when you want to transition to a new career, you wanna think about a new career, think about I call it oftentimes for my clients, like, a second chapter career. You had your first chapter and you did the thing and it accomplished its goals, whether that was like saving your 401k or buying a house or starting a family, and that was great. But do you want to do that for the rest of your life? Or is there maybe something else you would like to do? Um, when you're in the thick of it, when you're maxed out, not in a bad way, but just all capacity is taken, there isn't the time, there isn't the space, there isn't the margin, there isn't the bandwidth to do a big creative project or tackle a big personal goal or start a business, um, especially if you're in a depleted state. I know a lot of people that they're burned out in their job and they want to do something else, but they can't even imagine what else that would be. Well, because you can't imagine when you're burned out. Like, that's the function of burnout. You have less creativity, you have less innovation, because the function of burnout is to get you out of a bad situation. It's not to help you thrive in a bad situation. It's not to help you set up camp in a bad situation. It's to get you out of a bad situation. Like, if your country is in war and you have to flee, burnout will get you across the desert. It won't be like, "Hey, this desert's really beautiful. We should set up camp here and just like do art." No, no art, just survival. Um, and so thinking about buying yourself some runway is a great kind of framework for a career transition, for writing a book, for starting a business. It's like a mini retirement, but how much runway do you need? Do you need 3 months of financial runway? Do you need 12 months of financial runway? And something I didn't know a long time ago, but the length of the runway is determined by how large the plane is. Little planes only need a little runway to take off. And so if you only have a little project, you might not need a big runway. You might only need a month to launch a little project. But if you have a big life transition, a big change, you think about for your career, you might have gone to college for 4 years to figure out what you wanted to do and to prepare for that. That's a big runway. If you want to write a book, you need a longer runway. The bigger the plane, the more runway you need for it to successfully take off. Um, so buying yourself that gift, that ability, for especially, I don't know, when we get to middle age, like when we have kids and especially women, like our responsibility to our employers and our families and everyone else feels very pressing. And so I think about that runway as kind of like your college fund. What if you gave yourself another college fund? Maybe that's $10,000, maybe that's $50,000, and you bought yourself from some runway to explore this new project or to reinvent yourself or to see if you can find a new career. Um, and even if you don't launch it, there's a great benefit of knowing like I had the option to do something different. I gave myself the option. I gave myself permission and I decided I actually really like where I'm at. I had one friend who took a year off and in that space of like he had done this career for 15 years and he was like, "Do I want to do this the rest of my life? I don't know." So he took a year off. He did a bunch of classes. He took yeah, different courses. He earned some certifications. Like he explored lots of options. He explored lots of hobbies. Um, and then he interviewed for this new career that he had prepared for. And he was offered a couple jobs in it. And in the end, he was like, you know what? Now that I'm not burned out, now that I'm rested, now that I've done some fun stuff, I think I do actually want to go back to my old career. And he opted for a job in his old career. Um, and the really funny thing about his specific story was that the job he got in his old career, it was like a 50% raise over the last job he had because he had been in that job so long. So this is one of the ways that like a mini retirement can actually help your finances is if you've stayed very long in the same job, you might be underpaid. And the best way to increase your lifetime earning potential might be to switch employers occasionally. And a mini retirement is a great excuse to do that. Um, but yeah, it gives you that space to explore those things, to recover from burnout, to become more creative, to just get your head up off the ground. Like if you're trail running, you just have to stare at the trail the entire time or else you trip and fall. Like and you can't really take in the scenery. And mini retirement is a little bit like, actually, I'm gonna walk and I'm gonna look around and I'm gonna like see some new things and actually orient myself to what's happening around me.
And that's a really great story too, because then also, you go into this next phase post mini retirement and you feel anchored and like you've made a really clear decision rather than just defaulting into whatever pathway you're on. So I think that's,
Yeah.
and also, not making a choice is making a choice. So just continuing down the path without questioning it is still a choice that you're making, whereas what you described is a very intentional way of kind of choosing your path forward, so I love that. Another thing that you've talked about is, for our listeners, many of our listeners and viewers on YouTube are interested in moving abroad and location independence. Can you talk a little bit about how you can use mini retirements to explore what this could look like in your life?
Yeah, I've met a lot of people who wanted to live abroad and they're like, "Yeah, I want to live in Portugal or Spain or Ecuador." And I'm like, "That's amazing. Where's your favorite place there?" "Well, I've never been." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, it's possible. You can move
I
places that
moved
you've
here
never been."
without visiting, Europe in
Yeah,
general.
you can do
Always
it.
work out so well.
You can do it, but I think about these big changes. I don't know if y'all remember Evil Can Evil. Like this is such a old school reference. But he used to like on a motorbike jump canyons.
Yes.
But the trick to it is that you build ramps on both sides of the canyon. And if you really figure out the ramps, the jump looks dangerous. It looks daunting, but mathematically, it's pretty safe. And so you can use a mini retirement to essentially help build these ramps, to travel places, to test out places, go live there for a month, see how you feel about it, see how you like the vibe. Because some people can make the jump with no ramps, and that's great. But if you're feeling trepidation, if you're feeling hesitant, if you think, I want to make that jump, but it feels a little too big and a little too scary to just trust that I'm going to make it to the other side in one jump, you don't have to. Just build the ramps on both sides. Whether that's visiting that place, visiting a couple places, if you are like, I want to retire overseas, um, you could take a mini retirement once a year for 5 or 6 years and try out different countries. See where you like to go. Um, I think there's a misconception that big, bold changes are just for the courageous. They're just for the ones who are full of optimism and can figure things out and they're resilient. And yeah, it's a little bit easier if you have that like personality, but it's not exclusive to that personality. There's a systematic way to build courage and to build resilience. And the mini retirement gives you the ability to do those things that you look at someone who's super courageous and who's super bold and resilient and can figure stuff out. And you can do what they're doing with just putting a little bit more thought into building the ramps.
I like that a lot. And, I think there's another mindset bust that needs to happen there for Americans because a lot of us think, oh, well, I only go to Europe like once in my life or like a couple of times. And I think once you start doing things like this and you realize that tons of other people are doing things like this,
Yeah.
it becomes normalized.
Yeah.
And when we moved here, this was our 4th country that we moved to, so
Mm.
we were experienced at living abroad. We were living in Thailand when we chose this as our location, um, and, like, probably we should have visited, but at that point, we were like we had such a okay, to your point, our move to Thailand was a disaster in so many ways, and I think if we had actually gone to where we ended up moving and really tested it out, I don't think we ever would have moved there. So many
Mhm.
great things, so grateful for that experience, and I love Thailand still, but, we didn't do what you're describing when we packed up our life and moved. Now, I'm glad in a lot of ways that we did that because it got us out and doing the thing, and eventually we ended up here, so I wouldn't take it back, and I think that there's so much value in going and trying things and seeing how it works for you. And if you do go, a lot of times people will come for it's so funny. We see tourists all the time. They're here for like 3 days in my town, and they're like, all of the real estate offices have,
Yeah.
the pricing up for properties. And I hear these Americans, British, other people from all over. Oh, yeah, I could really see myself living here, and, they're talking, like, seriously about the properties, and I'm always kind of chuckling a little, not at them, but just, you can go somewhere for 3 days, and you're in vacation mode, and
Yeah.
but when you actually have to go somewhere and, like, grocery shop and, like, get around and maybe, have to deal with some of the logistics and everyday life, it becomes a very different thing. So you have to know if you can handle that, if, like, that's exciting to you and it's the place is what you thought it was. So I think that gives people a really nice opportunity to explore that through mini retirement. I would love for you just to, like, tie the bow on our conversation. We've talked about a lot, and probably a lot of our listeners and viewers, this might be a little bit of a different topic for them, and there's a lot of things kinda swirling around. Maybe they're feeling inspired to explore this. If our listeners and viewers could take away one thing from this conversation, what do you hope it is?
It might be more possible than you can see or imagine in this moment. And that's okay. Like, you don't have to start with the full picture. You just have to start. And it's one of the things, like, with my book, I my intention wasn't read the book and the next month you can take a mini retirement. But if you're curious, if you have questions, if you have yeah buts, read the book and just plant the seed because when I've noticed when we have an intention in life, when we have an aspiration and we slowly kind of tinker and work our way towards that, sometimes life provides opportunities. Maybe you end up getting laid off and you get a 6 month severance. Maybe you decide to switch jobs and the next employer's like, yeah, we don't need you to start right away. Like, it would be okay if you start 4 weeks later. Life you might move across the country and you're switching jobs and, like, you could take an extra month or 2 off. Like, life might provide you opportunities if you have that little seed planted, you know, planted in there. And those yeah buts, the more you learn and the more you, just become aware, like, they start to fade. You realize, actually, there's ways to figure this out. Like, everything's figure outable. Everything has a solution, even if you don't see it initially.
That's just like a life, I think, like a general life perspective. So I
Mm.
love that. I mean, you're looking at this through the lens of mini retirements, but I think that's so applicable across so many things that we just make assumptions but never really test those. It's such a good thing to leave us with. I want to ask you the question that I ask all of my guests, which is if you could recommend one book to listeners, and this is one that has profoundly impacted your life in some way, what would it be and why?
I read a lot of books, so it's always a tough question, but I've been thinking about this one, and one that I read over and over, it's actually currently in my bathroom, it might be useful for your readers, is a Seth Godin book. It's called The Icarus Deception. And it's based on the mythology of Icarus that, he wasn't supposed to fly too high to the sun because the wax on his wings would melt, but he also wasn't supposed to fly too low. And how as a culture, we've kind of erased that bottom part, like, don't shoot too low either because there's also danger, and so it's a great book for creatives, for entrepreneurs, for people who are trying to be more bold, and create lives that are beyond better. It's very bite-sized little nuggets of, like, I read it, I reread it every time I get something out of it.
That's a great recommendation. We'll be sure to link to that in the show notes. And we can't go without you telling our listeners and viewers how to find you, how to get your book. What's the best place to check out your ecosystem and follow your journey and your information?
Yeah, the book is everywhere. It's called Retire Often, and retireoften.com is kind of where everything lives. I've got a bunch of free worksheets and resources there. I have a newsletter that I send out sporadically. But people seem to like it. I don't know. It's strange. It's a little chaotic, but people have stuck around for years and they say they like it. So that's probably my most consistent thing is I write my email newsletter.
Well, we'll be sure to link to your website and to your book in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining me today, Jillian. This has been such a fun conversation. And, I hope there's somebody or many somebodies out there listening to this, watching this that have changed something inside of them has completely shifted and they're considering a different way of functioning in the world that can hopefully be more intentional and more joyful and lead to more financial success. So thank you so much for sharing with our audience.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to you, our listeners, our viewers, for being with us. If you are still here with us, you must have loved this episode and this conversation. So do be sure that you are subscribed or following so you don't miss conversations like this. And if you have a moment to rate and review the podcast, it makes a huge difference in helping me reach more people with the message of living a life that's not just better, but beyond better. And I would be remiss if I did not thank Rita Dominguez for her production of this podcast and our YouTube. She is truly the reason that you're watching or listening to this. If it weren't for her, you would never hear it. So I'm so grateful for her and everything she does to get our message out, our mission out, and share this with you. And I will be back with you before you know it.